Hi, my name is Mariana, or just Mari. I'm a Python developer who keeps getting into front-end development. I've been part of the Python community for many years now, especially in Brazil. But now I'm in this personal project of mine of conquering the North Pythonist world. So I'm very glad to be here with you at PyGotham, my first PyGotham ever. And I'll be presenting this talk with my colleague, Dani.
Hi, I'm Dani. I'm really glad to be here too. It's my first PyGotham too. And I'm a UX designer and a crazy cat lady. And yeah, I don't know what else to say about me, but let's go forward. So we both work at Lab Codes. It's a software studio based in Recife, from the northeast of Brazil. And it's an always sunny city and it's very good. And it's so good that Mari moved from here, from Rio to here, and come visit us when time's good and better than this pandemic's time.
Yeah.
And since I've mentioned that, we are in isolation. It doesn't look like, but we are. And yeah, that's it. Let's move forward.
So today we will talk about design systems. We will present to you the basic concept of a design system, its advantage for our work. We will explain how it can improve our work as developers. We'll then proceed to give you a bit of a context of a project we worked together and how we were able to use the design system concepts, the lessons we learned on the process, and some tips that may help you improve your own work with design and development.
So let's get started. What is a design system? Why having one at all? And let's start by defining it. There are a lot of definitions around, and it's really hard to explain it because it's always changing or maybe growing. But I particularly like InVision's definition of it as a collection of reusable components guided by clear standards that can be assembled together to build any number of applications. And for us designers, even though it's a team's responsibility to make an interface consistent between pages, interactions, designers often take it fully. And don't you look away because I know you do that, but it's not really your fault. So, but what's really good about it is that those building blocks can make it easier to distribute this responsibility by creating a source of truth between everyone involved. And everyone has a voice, and developers can make deliveries faster because some specs can be skipped, and even some layouts can be skipped. And last but not least, once it's done, it makes time to focus on what matters the most, the person on the other side of our software. And that is to build an experience rather than just a screen or good visuals. And the result of all of that is an application with a more professional looking, custom to the brand standards. And cool, but why just not using a bootstrap instead, you may ask? And the answer actually is you can. And we, for example, use Buma within the Lab Codes design system, and it's very useful for us to get it started more easily. But if you have used those frameworks in a product that has some years, you may understand that with time, it will no longer accomplish things easy breezy copy and paste. And you will most likely start to create components free of the framework's constraints. And to match the product's needs without a clear standard to follow, it's very dangerous because those consistency things that we're looking for will not be there. So a design system goes way beyond a component library. It creates a language based on the team's culture instead of generic words and nesting patterns that are really hard to replicate. designers, developers, and even stakeholders will be able to understand more easily when things are not matching the expected behavior for styles. And that is because everyone built it, not just designers. But no more design talking.
Okay, so what it means for us developers to work with a design system. Well, we are developers, we love patterns, and what the design system gives us above all is patterns to use. So thanks to the design system, we are able to implement a consistent UI much easier. When we look to a particular page, having a design system behind it, we can think of each component as a known element of a collection. So when we look at a button, instead of seeing, for example, hash color 14 pixel font size with 18 pixels padding, for example, we will look at it as a primary button that we built somewhere else and we are just reusing it. So the main points of having a design system is that we have a source of truth for the elements we're building. It gives us a common vocabulary to talk about these elements. We can use the design system to guide and structure our file system and the organization of our style sheets, and we can easily QA our own work before we submit it. When we're implementing a layout, we sometimes have doubts about that, or we face problems in development. We frequently have to talk about it with designers and the stakeholders. So it makes this much easier to talk about when we have a common language to refer to those components. Besides that, one of the hardest things about in development is naming things. Yeah, you know that. So
we are good at it.
Yeah, with the design system, well, I get those names for free. I don't even have to think about them because the designer has already thought about the purpose of those components. So they will be the best people to name them. And if I do that, I would probably do it based on visual elements. So I would call something a blue button. She designed it to be the primary button of that interface. So she will call that primary button. That makes so much more sense than like blue, big, round button, something like that. So the design system gives us a structure to work with. So it defines elements from the smallest things, like the colors we have to use and the font sizes available, to the big complex layouts. And we can reflect that structure in our file system. So we will have style sheets for our type system, for our colors, for our icons, buttons, form elements, and so on. And that structure will reflect the one that has already been defined by someone else. And well, when we're building something, it makes it so much easier to look at a component and see, instead of numbers, elements that we already know before. So when I QA my own work before delivering it, I can just look at the component I've just built and see it in terms of those elements. So I see that it needs, that title has a large font size, the main text has a small font size, it's using the default and small spacing elements I have. the primary and secondary color, and so on and so forth. So when I look at the component I've just built, I spot these elements, and it makes it much, much easier to see if something's off and should be corrected. So, but life is not as easy as it should be. And the project we got, was to redesign a platform with a lot of legacy code, unclear business rules, designs that weren't much consistent, and well, we started simple.
And we did what everyone does, actually. We created a Trello board and put everything on there, and it was a bit of a mess at the beginning, but with time things got smoother and then messy again. But let's try to explain a bit more. So we had a team of two sides. We had lab codes working, and we had the client side. And at lab codes, we had Deborah as an internal project manager, but also as a design leader, and I was the main designer or something like that. I don't know how to say it. And Mari was a developer. And from the client side, we had another developer and the product owner. So we gathered everything, as I said, and tossed it to a Trello board, and with time it got smoother and then really, really, really bad. But we had some small rituals, but not all the thing was in sync, and it was a bit hard to go on. And the project was already established and had all sorts of styles, but no guidelines at all. So after understanding a bit the audience and team's desires, our first proposal was to create a design system to make the product more consistent between pages, mostly. But the design system really takes a lot of time, and we didn't have that. So we started with a UI library like this, with some color schemes, some form components, and some icons, and moved from that.
So with time, things got complicated, and we felt the need to create a more robust process. We didn't have a continuous history between design and development, so it was really hard to keep track of how much time was spent in each phase. We didn't have a moment where developers would review design work to see if we could actually implement that. And things were constantly coming back from QA, sometimes with real problems that we had to address, but also with new requests from the client. So tasks would be eternally in that QA stage where we could never go forward because we always had something new to put on them. And that's when we started this new process.
Yeah, I mean, the design system was built to solve that, right? And yes, we had started it at this point, but one thing was missing. For a design system to be really a system, it should make it easier for designers and developers to make autonomous decisions, and it wasn't really happening. And in other words, they should link the what, the assets, to the why, the decisions, and to the how, and all of that within some rituals to connect all parts of a team. And more than just a robust UI library or guideline, a design system is really a process. And that is the game changer for real life projects.
Yeah, so we decided to migrate to Jira, not especially because of the technology, but because it had the resources we wanted. well, and migration struggles aside, that's the complete process we came up with. Looks really complicated, but it's not that much. We had a planning board where we would put ideas. So anything the client or ourselves would think was interesting to have would become a task over there. This idea would go to the discovery phase, where we would discuss the goals, what we wanted to achieve with that, what would be interesting for the user. So the basic definitions of what we wanted after all with that. And after the discovery, we would have the basic definitions of what would define this task as achievable.
And then it would go to the design board where we do our thing. And to go fast with it, to not spend too much time with it, we would go like just research, prototype, test, validate, and that's it. But after that, we would do what's really fundamental in this new process that we've built. That's the spec meeting. And that's a phase where designers and developers would get together to think of the designs that were built, to think if it's really achievable, if it would take too much time, if it's really doable, and also to measure efforts needed to it, and also to break some tasks into smaller ones, because you know how things get, and
yeah, this meeting became a real necessity when we started seeing that designs were starting to get really hard to implement, not because they were by themselves hard, but because we didn't research and smoothing between us. So we would sit together and maybe negotiate something easier to implement if we had something like too fancy that wouldn't fit in the time we had. We would look at our backend to see if we had all the data we needed to implement something, and then maybe add some extra time to build that. We would see if we already had components that, implemented before, and eventually add extra time to build the new ones. Anyways, we would actually see how much time and if it was actually possible to implement everything we had on the design. So then after everything specified, we would go to the development board. This one you already know. So we have things to do. They go in progress. They go to code review, and they get QA'd. And that's where the problem begins again. In QA, as we said before, it's a very delicate stage, because we spot errors, but sometimes also spot things that we actually decide should be different. And tests can spend a lot of time there before we can actually move them to production.
So we came up with a very clever thing again. And the thing was just a checklist to improve the QA cycle. It was very simple, yet varies from test to test. And it would mostly describe the test purpose and implemented behaviors against the design specs provided. It seems very simple and unnecessary, since we already had this information everywhere. But it made way easier to distinguish those requirements that we were talking about from the suggestions and improvements that we would like to do. And this makes tests to move smoothly through the cycle. And it also made the communication with stakeholders easier. They knew right away what they had to do to QA the test, and they finally understood that if you want something else from the test purpose, you should create a new test, not just go back and forth with the same one. And as you see, it's just a checklist. Actually, you can see the purpose of the task and then see everything that you have to do and check for missing things. And sometimes it would go back to development, sometimes it would go back to design. But either way, it would be way better than it was before.
Yeah, this became really interesting once we had a really complicated design with lots of fixed positions. And really edge cases on multiple breakpoints. So the actual QA list would include things like user and object states from the database. For example, if you're in this state, something should appear. If you're in that other stage, something else should appear. From that to all of the edge cases breakpoints that I found out in the development process that were that could break the layout. So yeah, that's it. When we are developing, we face so many edge cases and weird behaviors that if we just don't put that in the list, the person QAing our work won't notice that.
But would notice that something's like 2 pixels far from where it should be, and it's not really productive, you know.
Yeah.
So just trying to recap a bit, we talked about a real long process, and it's actually very simple. I mean, you have an idea, you go deep in that idea, and you describe it better so people can work on it. It goes through design, where we do all the layouts and think about things, and then it would go to the spec meeting. That's really a ritual that we created, and it's very useful. And after everything was spec, sometime it would go back to design, but often directly to development. And then it will go to the whole development cycle that we are familiar with. And then to the QA cycle, that's this one, with a very direct checklist to work on. And to be honest, all of that's really, really good, but the process that really works for everyone, I guess, is communication. And communication is for sure the most valuable tool in anything, but to have that working, we have to enable it to happen. And the tools we use make it possible, and it's very good, the ones that we use. We use Figma and Git and Jira, but any tool will do it if you are purposeful with it. And this way, everyone can have perspective and understand delays and struggles to come up with better strategies for the project. And our process makes it easier to gather constant feedback in all phases and keep non-technical people informed of the limitations and delays, since we review each other's work in several steps and rituals. It may seem like overwhelming and too much, but at the end it's very smooth. And for me, that's the most important thing of all times. And even though we couldn't achieve a robust design system for this project, because it ended, it was our first opportunity to test our process and design system methodology. And it was then improved to build our own design system to guide our internal projects and also be used as a framework to our clients. And it's still a baby system, but it already helped us a lot to improve our process. And we've been writing some content about it and about how we started, some content about accessibility that's really hard to find. Um, so we hope it helped you too to build your own design system if you're looking for it. And yeah, I think that's it for today. Thank you very much. We hope we have our experience helps you to grow your own team and make lasting bonds between designers and developers. And if you want to get updates on our design system or processes, sign up for our newsletter. That's the short link there, the PyGauss 2020. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so thank you for listening. We would really like to talk to you on the Q&A session to talk about any details you may want to discuss. And that's all. Bye-bye.
Bye.